The office fell silent as I walked through the door that morning. 3 years of being treated like I was nothing had led to this moment. My boss, Richard Palmer, sat at the head of the conference table, his smug smile fading when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, half rising from his leather chair. The other executives shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Walker," the judge announced from behind me, "please present your evidence." That's when Richard realized his petty revenge, canceling my ride home in a thunderstorm last winter, was about to cost him everything. See, what Richard didn't know when he left me stranded that night was that I'd been documenting every violation for years, or that I'd graduated law school before joining his company, or that my recorder had been running when he admitted to doctoring the financial reports I'd refused to sign. Let me take you back to where it all began, because this isn't just a story about workplace revenge. It's about standing up for yourself when the person with power thinks they can crush you without consequences. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after my father walked out when I was 8. Mom was my hero, a registered nurse who somehow found time to attend every school event despite her punishing schedule at Riverside Methodist Hospital. "Never let anyone make you feel small," she'd tell me. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you." My older brother Jake joined the military right out of high school, leaving just Mom and me in our modest ranch house on Maple Street. We weren't rich, but we had each other, and Mom made sure I had opportunities she never did. I was always the quiet, studious type, valedictorian of my class at Westerville South High School, then a scholarship to Ohio State. Law school was my dream, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. During my junior year at OSU, Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. I still remember the day she sat me down at our kitchen table, the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself framing her face as she told me the news. "This doesn't change anything about your future," she insisted, even as her voice trembled. "You keep going." But how could I? Her medical bills piled up despite her insurance. I started taking night shifts at a local diner, squeezing in study sessions during slow periods. My grades slipped just enough to jeopardize my law school prospects. Then came one of the most humiliating moments of my life. I was applying for additional financial aid, sitting across from the university's financial advisor, Mr. Harrington. As I explained our situation, he glanced down at my file and said, "Perhaps you should consider a more realistic career path. Law school is expensive, and students with your background rarely complete the program." My background? As if being the daughter of a nurse who worked herself to exhaustion somehow made me less capable? I didn't cry until I got home. Mom found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by scholarship rejections and student loan statements. "What did I tell you about letting people make you feel small?" she asked, sitting beside me despite her obvious fatigue from chemo. The next day, I applied to law school anyway, 7 of them, and I got in, with partial scholarships to 3. Mom made me a promise then, her grand gesture, as she called it. She'd been saving for years, a little nest egg she'd planned to use for retirement. Instead, she wanted to use it for my law school tuition. "I've seen how they treat people without power," she said. "You're going to be the one who fights back." What Mom didn't tell me then, the secret she kept, was that her cancer had metastasized. The doctors had given her less than 2 years. She didn't want me to abandon my dreams to care for her, so she kept the prognosis to herself while encouraging me to accept the offer from Georgetown Law. I deferred for a year to stay with her, working at a local law firm as a paralegal to save money and gain experience. That's when I met Richard Palmer for the first time. He was the firm's biggest client, the CEO of Palmer Tech, a mid-sized software company with government contracts. Even then, something about him made my skin crawl. Fast forward 5 years. I'd graduated from Georgetown Law with honors, but put my legal career on hold when Mom's condition worsened. After she passed, I felt adrift. Law firms were hiring, but I couldn't bring myself to join one. Instead, when I saw that Palmer Tech was looking for a compliance officer, I applied. The irony wasn't lost on me. working for the man who had once made my former boss make me file papers until midnight because the paralegal needs to learn her place. Richard didn't recognize me during the interview. Why would he? I was just another faceless employee to him. I got the job, telling myself it was temporary, just until I figured out what I really wanted. 3 years later, I was still there. The pay was good, the work challenging enough, and I'd built a reputation as meticulous and uncompromising when it came to regulatory compliance. This didn't always make me popular, especially with Richard, who viewed regulations as suggestions rather than requirements. The tension had been building for months. Palmer Tech was bidding on a major Department of Defense contract, one that would triple the company's value. Richard had been pushing harder than usual, demanding we find creative solutions to meet the technical requirements. The specifications clearly state we need to have certain security protocols in place, I explained during one particularly heated meeting. We're not there yet. That's why we have you, Sarah, Richard replied with that condescending smile that made my stomach turn, to make it look like we're there. I can't sign off on this, I said firmly. The room went silent. Richard's smile disappeared. Everyone out, he ordered, except Miss Walker. After the room cleared, he leaned across the table. Listen carefully. This contract means stock options for every executive in this company, options worth millions. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand that falsifying compliance documents is fraud, I replied. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really don't get it, do you? You're not here to protect the company from regulations. You're here to protect the company using regulations. That night, I stayed late, gathering documentation, taking screenshots, making copies. Something told me I was going to need evidence. As I worked, a blizzard moved in, unusual for March in Virginia, but climate change had made weather unpredictable. By 9 p.m., there was already 6 inches on the ground. My phone pinged with a notification. Your scheduled Uber ride has been canceled. Strange, I hadn't canceled it. I tried to book another, but the app showed no available drivers due to the storm. I called a taxi service with the same result. I headed to Richard's office, knowing he was working late too. My ride was canceled, I explained. The roads are getting bad. Could I get a ride with you? We live in the same direction. He lived in McLean, just 2 neighborhoods over from my Arlington apartment. Richard looked up from his computer, his expression unreadable. I'm staying until this is finished. You should have thought about the weather before deciding to be difficult today. You canceled my ride, I realized aloud. His smile confirmed it. Rideshare apps are so easy to hack if you know someone's email. Consider it a lesson in teamwork. It's 20 miles to my apartment, I said incredulously. There's a blizzard. The metro's still running, he shrugged. Probably. It wasn't. I checked. The last train had departed. Richard, this is ridiculous. It's dangerous out there. You know what's dangerous? Jeopardizing a $100 million contract because you think you're better than everyone else. You want a ride? Sign the compliance documents. I left his office without another word. At the front desk, I asked the security guard, Marcus, if he could help. I'd drive you myself, but my shift doesn't end until 6 a.m., he said apologetically. But look, there's a hotel 2 blocks down. I can walk you there. The wind was biting as we trudged through the snow. Marcus insisted on carrying my laptop bag. Mr. Palmer's got a reputation, he said quietly. This isn't the first time he's pulled something like this. At the hotel, I thanked Marcus and checked in, using the company credit card I had for emergencies. As I sat on the edge of the bed, shivering despite the room's warmth, something inside me snapped. 3 years of swallowing my pride, of watching Richard bully employees, manipulate reports, and skirt regulations, all while I told myself I was just biding my time. My mother hadn't raised me to be a doormat. She'd raised me to fight back. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video, documenting what had just happened. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to the Department of Defense's Inspector General, the SEC, and the Virginia State Bar Association. The storm raged outside, but inside, a calm clarity washed over me. Tomorrow, everything would change. I spent the night organizing evidence and outlining my legal strategy. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow and an eerie silence. I took a taxi back to the office, arriving early. The few employees who had braved the roads glanced at me curiously as I walked to my office with purpose. At 9:30 a.m., Richard called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't invited, but that didn't matter. I had a different appointment. At 10 a.m. sharp, I walked into the main conference room where the executive team was gathered. Richard was mid-sentence, something about compliance issues being resolved. He stopped when he saw me. "This is a closed meeting," he said coldly. "I'm aware," I replied, "but I think everyone here should meet my guests." On cue, the conference room door opened again. In walked 3 people: Agent Diane Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, Bernard Thompson from the DoD Inspector General's office, and Judge Maria Vasquez, who had signed the warrants they carried. The office fell silent as I walked through the door that morning. 3 years of being treated like I was nothing had led to this moment. My boss, Richard Palmer, sat at the head of the conference table, his smug smile fading when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, half rising from his leather chair. The other executives shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Walker," the judge announced, "please present your evidence." That's when Richard realized his petty revenge, canceling my ride home in a thunderstorm last winter, was about to cost him everything. I stepped forward, placing a flash drive on the table. This contains 3 years of documented fraud, false statements to government agencies, and willful violations of federal contracting requirements, I stated clearly. It also includes recorded conversations in which Mr. Palmer explicitly instructed me and others to falsify compliance documents. Richard's face drained of color. "You can't record conversations without consent in Virginia," he sputtered. I smiled for the first time in months. Actually, Virginia is a one-party consent state, and I consented. Agent Chen stepped forward. "Richard Palmer, we have a warrant to search and seize all company servers and electronic records." Bernard Thompson added, "The Department of Defense is immediately suspending all contracts with Palmer Tech pending investigation." Richard lunged toward me, but the FBI agent moved between us. "That would be a very poor decision, Mr. Palmer," she said quietly. "You're nobody," Richard hissed at me. "A compliance officer with delusions of grandeur. Who do you think you are?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm Sarah Walker, Georgetown Law, class of 2019. I've spent 3 years documenting every violation while you thought I was just a pushover who would look the other way. That night, you left me stranded in a blizzard. That was your biggest mistake. It showed me exactly who you are." I turned to the other executives, many of whom looked shell-shocked. "I've submitted my resignation, effective immediately. I've also filed a separate whistleblower claim with the SEC. Those of you who cooperate fully will likely avoid personal liability." As I walked out, Richard shouted after me, "You'll never work in tech again. I'll make sure of it." I paused at the door. "No, Richard, you won't be in a position to make sure of anything." I nodded to Marcus, the security guard, who had just arrived with additional federal agents. "Please show them to the server room." "With pleasure, Miss Walker." As I walked through the lobby, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me, raised voices, demands for lawyers, the systematic dismantling of Richard Palmer's empire. I stepped outside into the bright winter sunshine, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your mother would be proud. J. Harrington, OSU Financial Aid." I looked up at the clear blue sky and whispered, "This one's for you, Mom." The fallout was swift and far-reaching. By nightfall, Palmer Tech's stock had plummeted 63%. News vans lined the street outside the company headquarters. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, former colleagues, law firms suddenly interested in my services. I ignored them all and drove to Arlington National Cemetery. Jake had flown in from his military base in Germany as soon as he heard what happened. We met at Mom's grave, where the snow had been cleared away. "You did it, sis," Jake said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You became exactly who she knew you could be." "I don't know about that," I replied. "I just reached my breaking point." Jake shook his head. "Breaking points don't turn into federal investigations unless you're prepared. Mom always said you were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers." We stood in silence for a moment before Jake handed me an envelope. "Mom asked me to give you this if you ever stood up to, and I quote, those corporate bullies." Inside was a letter written in Mom's neat handwriting, dated just weeks before she passed away. "Sarah, if you're reading this, you found your voice. I always knew you would. What you might not know is that your father didn't just walk out on us. He embezzled from the hospital where we both worked. When I threatened to report him, he left. I stayed silent to protect you and Jake from the scandal, but I've regretted that silence every day since. Some injustices shouldn't go unchallenged, no matter the cost. The nest egg I gave you for law school, it wasn't just my savings. It was the settlement money from the hospital after I finally reported your father, 15 years too late. They paid me to keep quiet about their negligence in hiring him despite red flags. I'm sorry I never told you. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just teaching you the wrong lesson. Never be silent in the face of wrongdoing. Your voice is your power. All my love, Mom." I folded the letter with trembling hands. All these years, I thought Mom was just a hardworking nurse who got unlucky in love. I never imagined she'd fought her own battle against corporate corruption. 2 days later, my lawyer called. The SEC had approved my whistleblower claim. Under federal law, I was entitled to 15 to 30% of any fines levied against Palmer Tech. Initial estimates put that number in the millions. "What happens to the employees?" I asked. "The ones who weren't involved?" "The company will likely be acquired or restructured," my lawyer explained. "But there's something else you should know. We've been contacted by Marcus Johnson, the security guard." Marcus, it turned out, had been gathering his own evidence. For years, Richard had been underpaying the support staff, manipulating time cards, and denying benefits by misclassifying workers. Marcus had detailed records, but didn't know how to use them until he saw me take action. "He's asking if you'd be willing to help with a class action lawsuit," my lawyer said, pro bono. I didn't hesitate. Set up the meeting. Within weeks, I had a new purpose. I rented a small office in downtown Arlington and established the Walker Whistleblower Advocacy Group. The SEC settlement provided enough funding to hire 2 paralegals and an administrative assistant, all former Palmer Tech employees who had been collateral damage in the company's collapse. Richard was indicted on 17 federal counts. His lawyer approached me about testimony that might reduce his sentence. He's prepared to provide evidence against larger defense contractors engaged in similar practices, the lawyer explained during our meeting. "What does he want in return?" I asked. "For you to acknowledge that he gave you opportunities when no one else would." I almost laughed. Counteroffer. He cooperates fully, admits wrongdoing in open court, and establishes a fund for the employees who lost their jobs and benefits due to his actions. 6 months later, Richard stood before Judge Vasquez, pleading guilty to all charges. Part of his plea agreement included a public statement. My actions were motivated by greed and a belief that rules didn't apply to me. I particularly regret my treatment of Sarah Walker, whose only crime was integrity. The fund being established in her mother's name will hopefully begin to make amends to those I've harmed. As for Mom's grand gesture, her nest egg that put me through law school, I used my portion of the settlement to establish the Eleanor Walker Scholarship for Children of Whistleblowers at Georgetown Law. The first recipient was Marcus Johnson's daughter, who had deferred her own law school dreams to help support her family. The unexpected twist came 1 year to the day after the confrontation. I received a letter from Ohio State University. Mr. Harrington, the financial aid advisor who had once dismissed my law school ambitions, was retiring. He had recommended me as his replacement. While I can never undo the discouragement I gave you years ago, his letter read, perhaps you can ensure no other student with promise is ever told their background unrealistic. I didn't take the job. My advocacy work was too important. But I did agree to give a series of lectures on corporate ethics and whistleblower protections. Standing at the podium in the same university where I'd once been made to feel small, I saw my journey come full circle. My phone buzzed during the lecture, a text from Jake with a photo attachment. He had visited Mom's grave and left a news clipping about the Walker Scholarship. Next to it was a simple note, "The grand gesture continues." Looking back now, 5 years after that snowy confrontation, I realized that standing up to Richard wasn't just about workplace justice. It was about honoring my mother's legacy and reclaiming my own power. The advocacy group has now helped over 300 whistleblowers navigate the treacherous waters of corporate retaliation. Every time I hear a judge call out the name of someone we've helped, I think about that moment when Richard realized his world was crumbling. Sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't the grand public showdowns, but the quiet moments when we decide enough is enough. Your breaking point can become your turning point if you're prepared. If you've ever felt powerless against a system designed to crush dissent, remember my story. Document everything. Know your rights. Find your allies. And when the moment comes to stand up, stand tall. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of justice and redemption. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right isn't just possible, it's necessary. Thanks for watching, and remember, your voice is your power.